Hello, everyone. This is Sumner Madison, avian ecologist for the Bureau of Natural Heritage Conservation, Wisconsin DNR. And before I begin, I'd like to just mention my co-presenters, if you will, co-contributors, co-conspirators, Julie Van Stappen and Peggy Berkman from the National Park Service, Royce Galindo and Abigail Fergus from the Bad River Band of the Lake Superior Chippewa tribe. They've been very helpful and very involved in the conservation of piping plovers for many, many years. So I'm going to talk first about the piping plover and then talk about its history in the islands and then its current status and distribution, and then conclude with a future outlook. So the piping plover is one of Wisconsin's rarest breeding birds, on the endangered species list in Wisconsin since 1979, and on the federal endangered species list since 1986, when at that time there were only 17 pairs in the Great Lakes. And what you see here in the upper left and the lower right are two different piping plovers. In the upper left, it's the male. The male typically has a black eyebrow line that extends to the corner of the eye, and generally has a thicker breast band than the female. As you can see, the female pictured here in the lower right, the eyebrow line does not quite extend to the eye, and the band at the neck is a little bit thinner. And then above that is just a photo of one of the adults. They both incubate, by the way, the eggs and brood the chicks, but you can barely see the chick with the adult. That they really blend in well to the sandscape. The piping plover is a bird that typically requires extensive sand, gravel beaches, or sand with gravel patches. It's a bird that's one of our smallest birds. It has a wingspan of only 19 inches. It weighs about 1.9 ounces, the adults, that is. If you think about the weight of that, it's about the weight of a tennis ball. The young, when they hatch out, when they reach 7 to 14 days of age, and that's the age we ban them at, they weigh about 1 ounce, which is about the weight of a pencil or a slice of bread. So they are beach and dune obligates. You won't find them nesting anywhere else but along a beach and possibly at the edge of a dune, which in Wisconsin we find along Lake Michigan and along Lake Superior. Typically, they nest on the beach where the beach is the widest. Optimally, that would be 50 to 75 meters, but they can nest on narrow beach widths and possibly at the edge of a dune. And that's certainly something that we are seeing with climate change as we get increasing storm systems that come in that are quite fierce, and you have changes in water levels and greater precipitation. And so we have some situations where the beach is not as wide. Typically, these beaches have absent or sparse vegetation 1 to 5 meters from the nest. And often there will be a large piece of driftwood or a stick within 25 meters of the nest. And as I mentioned, they are an obligate of beach and dune landscapes. Now, what's interesting about this bird is that in the nest cup or nest scrape, often they'll have these tiny white pebbles. And these function as a way of slightly elevating the eggs. So if there is a rain event, they are slightly protected because of this slight elevation. And then, of course, with the sand, the water does not accumulate. It's a very porous situation. Typically, it's 4 eggs. The male will make the nest scrape 5 to 10 days before the female selects the scrape. So often you'll come across what are called dummy scrapes. The earliest Wisconsin record for breeding has been mid-May, and the latest has been 10th of July. That has been, I should say, on Lake Michigan. On Long Island, typically we find birds nesting mid to late May, and then again, a second batch of birds will be nesting the first 10 days of June. So basically, we have 2 different nesting periods when adults are nesting, so they're not all synchronous. There's a little bit of asynchrony there. Incubation is about 28 days. Young hatch out within 48 hours of each other. And the fledging is also at about a month. So this is the earliest photo in the upper right-hand corner of a piping plover nesting. This is from 1930, about 6 miles south of Kenosha at that time. And at that time, back nearly 100 years ago, the beaches along Kenosha in southeastern Wisconsin were described as gravelly, with dunes rising 100 feet from the shore and extending inland for nearly a mile. So quite a different landscape than what we see today, where we have a lot of rip-rapping occur, as well as development. Plovers are no longer nesting along the southeastern shore of Lake Michigan, but they do occur here as migrants. So we have records for the Kenosha area from 1923 to 1938. So just about 100 years ago. As far as Lake Superior is concerned, most records up through the early 70s were from Barker's Island in Superior. Down among the Apostle Islands, the earliest record of an observation of potential nesting was in 1959 by David Bradley. And then beginning in 1974, I first encountered nesting piping plovers unexpectedly. I was doing a colonial waterbird survey along the Lake Superior shoreline. And at that time, back in 1974, Long Island was truly an island. Today, it's really a long peninsula with Chequamegon Point. At that time, I had to wade across from the south end of Long Island to Chequamegon Point. At that time, that's when I observed the adults exhibiting broken wing displays, indicating that eggs or young were present. We were able to document a pair nesting here. And between 74 and 83, during those years, all the Wisconsin nesting records came from Long Island Chequamegon Point. I should mention that earlier, from 74 through 86, there were also birds nesting up in the St. Louis River estuary. So 1974 was the first confirmed nesting. After 1983, what we had was a disappearance of the piping plover as a breeding bird in Wisconsin. And this coincided with really a collapse of the population in the Great Lakes. Beginning in 1998, however, as conservation measures occurred, meaning that there were efforts to protect the nest with exclosures, which I will show in a second, the birds started to come back, and Michigan is kind of the stronghold. I should say that the bird is presently endangered in the Great Lakes. Recovery goal is about 150 pairs, and we're presently about halfway there. We have around 70 or so nesting pairs in the Great Lakes. And 1998 was the first year that we saw them returning to Wisconsin after a 15-year absence. And the birds that nested on Wisconsin's Long Island, those birds came from Michigan. And the reason we know that is that each bird is banded with a unique color combination that represents the location of the banding. So what we do is when birds come back, this is a real team effort involving the Bad River Tribe and the Park Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Wisconsin DNR, and the Nature Conservancy. We monitor the nesting, and before monitoring really gets underway, once a nest is found, a metal exclosure that you see here in the upper center of the slide is placed over the center of the nest. Back in 98, the exclosures are quite a bit larger than they are today, that are being used today. But we also were surveying critical habitat, designated critical habitat at Long Island, Michigan Island, Seagull Bar on Lake Michigan, Wisconsin Point near Superior, and at Point Beach. These were the 5 critical habitat sites designated by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So again, these would include annual presence-absence surveys, locating nests, installing exclosures, and then having the plover monitors monitoring nest success. Along with this, we would be doing some public education. Included among this is trying to restrict any ATVs from motoring across the sandscapes. So this is a shot of 1998, looking at the plovers from a distance. And as you can see, the beach was quite wide here. The nest itself was about 35 meters from the lake edge. And at that time, back in the late 90s, The beach widths were indeed quite a bit wider than they are today due to increasing lake levels and severe storm activity as a result of some effects of climate change that I mentioned. So here we are in 1998 installing the exclosure, this first exclosure, quite a bit larger as I mentioned. At that time, it was 4 feet tall, 5 feet on a side. The monofilament line stretched across the top to keep out any potential aerial predators. Basically, this is welded wire fencing, basically 2x4 that allows the adults to effortlessly enter and leave the exclosure. Now, in the upper left-hand corner is just a shot, as I mentioned before, of ATVs that are not really an issue. They were kind of an issue back then. They aren't really an issue today. But in this case, this fellow in the upper left-hand corner was a short order cook from Ashland, and he was using his time off that particular day to explore the shoreline. And we had a good conversation. We told him about the piping plovers, and he was very cooperative. ATVs really haven't been an issue. We really have more of an issue with dogs off of leash in the Apostles because a dog unknowingly and unwittingly to the dog owners, the dog may drive a piping plover from its nest, exposing the eggs or young to the weather, and this can result in a failure of the nest. In that period in 1998, we had 3 young hatch out, and we captured 3 young and banded them, and we capture them in a process that involves basically corralling them with 15 to 20 different volunteers and simply dropping a hat or a cloth over the chick. Since 1998, there have been a total of 125 chicks banded, and among those, 82% of those in the past 12 years, which reflects an increasing number of piping plovers that are nesting. And here's a very busy slide that shows the history of what's happened since 1998 on Long Island and also in the Apostle Islands. Between 98 and 2005, we had 1 pair each. In 2006, 3 pairs on Long Island, 1 pair on Outer Island. 2007, 4 pairs on Long Island, 1 pair on Outer Island. In 2008, 5 pairs all on Long Island, and then the most number of pairs we've had in the islands, and in this case, all on Long Island, was in 2011, which was where we had 6 pairs. Now, the last couple of years, we've seen the birds basically occupy other island sites. And this is as a result of shrinking available beach habitat on Long Island. The birds are now pioneering to other sites. They, in fact, have returned to Outer Island in 2019 and 2020. And then for the first time ever, they nested at Michigan Island, one of the critical habitat sites. We're very happy to see that they have occurred, not only continue to occur at Long Island, but that they in fact are using sandscapes at Michigan Island and Outer Island. So this is just a composite slide showing some of the effects of these severe storm events and rising lake levels. What you see here in the upper left is an exclosure. This is a smaller exclosure that we now use to put over the nest. In this case, severe storm event has brought the water up to and through the exclosure where the nest is. And then you have potential predators such as a crow or raven. Other aerial predators that are potential are merlins as well as gulls. In this case, the chick that survived here, which you can see in the lower right-hand corner, is a chick that we dubbed the miracle chick because it was able to survive this storm event. This is something we're seeing more and more in the Apostles these days as climate change becomes more pronounced. I just want to mention briefly at the other end of the lake up near Duluth Superior, we are working on a habitat project to attempt to bring back piping plovers to the Duluth Superior Harbor in Lake Superior. In this case, it's in Alloway Bay. And we hope that we'll be seeing piping plovers nesting here in the future. As far as the future, it looks very bright. 2019, there were a total of 10 nesting pairs in Wisconsin, 5 in the Apostle Islands, and 5 in Lower Green Bay at Cat Island Restoration Chain. And together with Cat Island, the Cat Island restoration chain, and what's happening in the Apostles. This past year, we had a total of 9 nesting pairs, so that's quite an increase from the early years back in 1998, in the early part of this century, where we had just 1 nesting pair. Now we have 9 to 10, and that's very exciting. And so I think the future looks very bright. As far as where these birds go during the winter, they migrate down, for the most part, to the southwestern end of Florida, along the Gulf. However, in 2015, this picture to the left, we had one of our chicks that we banded show up at Cancun. And so far, I've been unsuccessful to date to get my administrators agree to a trip to look at potential wintering piping plovers in Cancun. But anyway, the future looks very bright. We are very pleased that the plovers themselves are adapting to changing conditions on Long Island and are now nesting at other sites in the islands. And I think with our conservation measures, with our continued monitoring, and our continued banding efforts, we will see birds continue to do well, and hopefully for posterity, we'll be able to celebrate eventually the recovery of this species and its delisting from both the federal and state endangered species list. Thank you very much.